I suppose, like most parents, to be honest, my motivation in talking to you was twofold. One, because you are one of the foremost experts in parenting in the global conversation, have a great social media following, are very influential, and that's good for us as you're good for us as a high profile guest, but also as a parent, like when I've spoken to, like, say, Brené Brown or Gabor Mate, other medical professionals, my motivations are personal. What the hell should we do with our children?
It's really hard, because on one level, we should all be spiritual wisdom, truth seekers, consciousness raisers of our own evolution before we become parents. And yet, it's through the parenting journey that we're afforded the greatest portal to achieve that. So it's really difficult. If we are open to understand that the parenting process is the portal to understanding your own past and healing your own wounds, then you're going to really activate yourself in this journey. But most people are not open to that. They're not open to raising their own consciousness. So then they, quote unquote, use their children as pawns, just like they were used. And so continues the dysfunctional generational pattern over and over again. This doesn't mean that we don't screw our children up. I mean, my kid is royally screwed up, thanks to me. But I am using this moment, these challenging moments, to really look in the mirror. And if we could do that in all relationships, but especially in this most intimate one, then we have an opportunity to keep healing. But what's happening on the contrary is we keep having the children, but we don't disrupt the patterns. So then we just keep having children to keep, enduring the suffering. The buck has to stop somewhere. And this doesn't mean we're perfect. This doesn't mean it's a destination we have to arrive at. But it does mean that we have to take this seriously and end the suffering somewhere.
Thank you. It's commonly understood that we find it hard to observe our own pathology, particularly in real time. Doctor, can you give me an example of how you have, perhaps in retrospect, noticed how a part of your parenting has been as a result of your own trauma or need to evolve? An example of where you've retrospectively gone, oh, wow, I shouldn't have done that. I wouldn't do that again. That's how I would do that in future.
Oh my goodness, it's every day, but a big theme that's personal to me, which may resonate with your audience, is that I grew up in India as this Indian woman, which is a prototype of someone who is the ultimate people pleaser. And I learned to abnegate the self. I learned to martyr myself, and I thought that's what it meant to be a really kind and good person. So this is my classic mold. And then on top of that, my temperament was of a very sympathetic, sensitive person, intuitive person. So put that together and you have this bleeding empath. So most of us, so just to digress, to just let other people know how they can deconstruct this for themselves, we grew up in a childhood culture, right? In an ambiance that gives you certain prototypes of how to get love. And so mine was, you get love this way. You get love by being disobedient, self-abnegating, deprecating mess of a girl who doesn't know who she is, but you suffer the self, but you give to the other. The other is glorified. This was my prototype. Each one of us has a prototype of how we were taught subconsciously to receive love, to receive validation, to receive worth. And many of us mold to that very quickly, very quickly. So that's the fundamental prototype we are raised with. But then, in addition to who we are as humans. Now, if had I been a rebellious kind of person, I would have ended up with a different prototype. I would have rebelled. I would have become an addict maybe because I couldn't have molded to that pleaser. Right? So I would have gone the other way. So it depends on what our childhood ambiance was, plus who we are temperamentally. And these two, the nature-nurture, is a very key factor in observing your patterns. So that was my pattern, and I ended up in many relationships where my boundaries were violated. So for me, as a parent, the hardest thing that I had to really learn, and I'm still terrible at it, my daughter caught on at the age of 7 how terrible I was in creating boundaries. And she would say, oh, I just need to ask mom 10 times. And the 10th time she's going to say yes. She just learned it. And that's what happens. Our children just learn how to play us in our wounds. And the opportunity then is to look in the mirror. So I began to see that I was unable to create boundaries, not because of what my child needed. Like, she didn't need loose boundaries. It's because I was so inherently afraid of being seen as the bad one, because I so was attached to the image of this pleasing person. So I had to really detach from that image, right? We're all married to an image. And my image was this, always say yes. But I was ruining my daughter, and I have ruined her in many, quote unquote, ruined her. I have, wounded her in many ways, confused her in many ways by this bleeding empath desire to please. Because what's with the bleeding empath is that we say yes, yes, yes for years and decades. But man, when we say no, when we decide it's a no, we just abandon everyone. We just burn the house down, So it's confusing for a child, And I've had to see myself in the mirror. And it was wretched at first to observe that in me, that I was so wounded, so attached to my ego of wanting to be the pleaser, that I couldn't serve my child in the way my child needed to. So that's one prototype. But there are other prototypes, There's the negligent parent, there's the over-obsessed with control parent, there's the power-tripping parent, there's all different sorts of parents. I was the pleaser parent who suffered in boundaries. And then, so we have to really deconstruct who we are based on our nature-nurture syndrome, and be brave enough to break the pattern. So I had to learn to break the pattern and let go of this desire to be the Mahatma, I still have it though, but yeah.
Yeah, I got a lot from that. When you talk about prototypes, it makes me wonder about archetypes, and it makes me wonder about essence. I wonder how your siblings evolved through your childhood, and if they have comparable challenges or distinct ones.
Definitely, especially in heavily traditional cultures like India, where tradition is lauded, but it's actually a great suffocator of the essence. In those cultures, males and females have very defined gender roles. So called man and woman, how to be a man and how to be a woman. So my brother, I only have one sibling and he's male. So he was prototypically, archetypally raised to be a man in that culture. And I'm sure suffered his own demons. I remember my father would be so hard on him to succeed, but never hard on me. But I was told, do you know how to cook? How you're going to adjust in your in-laws' house. So I was given different messages. He was given different messages. I rebelled though eventually and did leave India because I knew I was suffocated in my essence and I had to leave. For him, maybe he didn't leave because he wasn't suffering so much. It's advantageous to the male in those cultures, but for a woman who had this other side to her that was rumbling of the need to discover her essence, I then had to leave. You have no choice at some point. You have to leave to discover who you are. So all of us are leaving in some way. We're always departing. How far do we abandon our authenticity is the question. How many years do we abandon it till we return home to it?
Where did you go, and what was there a pivotal moment that made you realize that you required a kind of severance from your family of origin in order to become yourself?
Yeah, I think the first thing, and I see this in all my clients as well, is a physical separation. We need to separate in form to discover who we are in the formless. So I had to get the F out of India. So I was clamoring to leave at the age of 12. I gotta get out. I just knew physically there needed to be separation. And it's really the process that I take my clients through too. And they're very scared to physically separate. But we have to go on a journey. So I left and came to America and went to California, to San Francisco. And then I immediately, within 6 months, went on a Vipassana meditation retreat at the age of 21. And I began to discover my formless, authentic self. So my process was immediate. I left and then I left. So I left in the form, and I began departing in the formless as well from mainstream culture. And then began a long journey of self-discovery through meditation. I mean, really, while I'm psychological in my foundation, I'm more meditative and contemplative, and that really freed me. But it still took decades to ultimately be brave enough and bold enough to really be my authentic self. It took years and years and years.
What challenges do you face with this, superficially at least, conflicting set of ideals? One around a formless, one could say, spiritual ideals, and these rather more material, evidence-based, procedural ideas that come from medicine, even in a more amorphous field like psychology or psychiatry. This is still sort of formulated. Are there challenges, and how do you mesh those two ideas together?
Yeah, so I always look at every single challenge through the form and the formless, both the lenses that I have. So I understand form, but I understand it through the lens of formlessness. I never let formlessness leave me. So for example, right now we're in this virus pandemic, right? Form, we're being attacked on the form level. Our physical is being compromised. There is, we have to have social distancing, all these form-based challenges. But really on the formless level, nothing has changed. Right? On the formless level, this is the eternal impermanence of the transience of life. Like, what's new? On the formless level, the universe is like, what's new? Right? Nothing's new. The mortal is going crazy because she's realizing her mortality. Really? On the formless level, it's the greatest desire of every Zen master. Right? And now we're learning this, like now. So nothing has changed. So on the formless level, we are eternal. So the perturbations on the form level, I understand and I have compassion for, but with humor, no? And with a lightness of being. So I help parents see that they're just caught up in the myopic moment and none of it really matters on the formless. And I help them detach from their egoic expectations of how this moment should be and how their child should be. Because in the grand scheme of the universe, this is a speck. And so I help parents to release their control. And their control is only coming out of scarcity because they think this moment is significant. And it isn't, So I named my daughter Maya, which means illusion, to remind me that if I think she's mine or this matters, it's an illusion. So but understanding we have form-based limitations. So I have compassion for that. But we can navigate the form so much better and easier with play if we understand formlessness. And what's missing is that people typically struggle to understand the formless elements of life. And we just get obsessed with the form, the ego, the density of this moment.
How many of the challenges that we face as parents and as people do you think could be ameliorated or at least improved by accessing what would once have been known as the sacred but is now difficult even to refer to? And I know you use the word formless.
100% of human suffering is from the mental attachments to the form. All our suffering is because we want things to match the form-based expectations, what culture has told us is important. You and I were talking pre-interview about how the education system has not wanted to miss a beat and has sent curriculum home with grading systems. And I've been protesting that, saying you have to adapt. Now we're truly in the formless level of education. Can we not appreciate that for a moment, right? But people are so attached, thinking that is a prescription. And we're seeing now more than ever, there is no prescription. Life is always unexpected. But we fossilize life because we want the illusion of certainty. And grades and achievement and outcome and zip codes and the number of cars in your driveway somehow make us feel like we are, and we get an identity from this outside, these outside accoutrements. But you and I know how false that is, how deluded that is, what an illusion. And then we suffer. So when our job is taken away, we suffer. When our kid doesn't match the expectation, we suffer. But who creates the suffering? We do, because we've imposed an expectation. We have this checklist in our pocket, check, 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 check. And now we see life doesn't work like that. And if it did work like that, how sad for you, because you really thought life works like that, you know. The good child, I always talk about that good child, that obedient child. How sad for you if you only have good children, you know, because you really think that you're amazing and that you're doing something and you're not, you know. So I love the quote unquote bad kid, because now the bad kid makes you turn on your head and shatter your illusions.
What do you think is the primary lesson that we're taught by children that we can't control when you encounter the strength of spirit that a child brings into your home, and watching that evolve and develop? And me speaking personally, my sort of inability to control it, but also my kind of awe at my older daughters in particular, because you know she's evolving more, so I've known her longer. That to see like this sort of strength, this character, this spirit, this independence. I mean that in a kind of a literal way, like you said with the naming of your daughter. I quite early recognized there is something present. This is not just sort of like a genetic pass the parcel. This is something that's come from somewhere else.
Yeah, and it's such a fascinating juxtaposition of the my, you know, they are in some ways ours, because for many of us who have them biologically, they do share this DNA, and they do share the physicality and the traits, and the woman will say, hell, she's mine or he's mine. Look at my body, I'm wrecked because of this child. So it's the juxtaposition of the my and the so not mine, right? So when you realize that this child I thought was mine, but damn it, this indomitable spirit that cannot be controlled, and the awe, but the humility that comes with it is the lesson. You know, the ego, non-ego, the formlessness, the non-duality of that is the most brilliant spiritual lesson of all. You know, it's mine, but not mine at all. And what a brilliant lesson. You know, we cannot control our children. I mean, it's just absolutely a delusion to think that we could. But most parenting paradigms, the traditional ones, espouse control. And I come along, and people like me, or, you know, many, I'm sure there are many, who say that it's an illusion. And people don't like that. You know, parents resist me and walk out of rooms and get angry with me because they think that I'm espousing that they are not important. You know, parents have tied their importance, their relevance to control, instead of understanding this is a spiritual partnership, and you are the evolving one, and they are the teachers, and you're not losing power when you look at life like that. You're gaining spiritual power because you're the taker. Don't you want to be the taker? But they don't want to be the taker because they're like, you're just fooling me. You're actually taking my power. And this is the sadness of the human psyche, right? We so want egoic dominance, even with our children, you know.